Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or UPTV, as we like to say on the televised version of this program. So whose views are these? Well, you may ask, or may well you ask, or something like that. These views are our own. And by our in this instance, I mean myself. That's pretty much it. Boy, there's a really distinctive hum happening here. Wow, it's really loud. Anyway, you probably can't hear it. I don't know, maybe you can hear it. I remember in my last episode there was music playing in the other room, and I was wondering if you could hear it. And indeed, when I was editing the video, you could hear it. It was pretty loud. Now there's a big hum. Hum. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. I can't control it. It's just strange and annoying, as many things are when you deal with public radio or commercial, non-commercial radio. Wow. Sorry, I'm fiddling with my headphones. I've got different earphones now, and they're not as good as the other ones. I can't hear as well. So, hey, how are you? That's the question of the day, I guess. How are you? How are you? How's it going? It's the New Year's Eve special. We're closing in on the end of 2018. If you're listening to us live, then it's not just ahead. I mean, there's a few hours to go. But if you're watching us on UPTV or YouTube, you missed it. It's already 2019. But as I speak, it's 2018. It's the end of the year. So, I mean, there are a number of different things I could do. I could try to recap all of that's gone on this last year, but, that would be really hard because a lot of things were happening. Immigration was just all over the place. I mean, it was a topic. The thing is, immigration is, how can I put this, is a tool used by the current administration, in particular the head of that administration, as a wedge kind of thing, to like drive people apart, to like say, okay, you're either with me and my anti-immigration stance, or you're with those guys and you feel sorry for those invaders who are coming here wreaking death and destruction and bringing disease and drugs and whatever it is they like to imagine that immigrants are bringing here. So, I mean, it's a very carefully calculated, it's weird. Now, how can I put this? So when you get older, like some of us are, some kinds of activities that were once more opaque to you become clearer. You can look at them and go, oh, that's obviously this, and this is obviously that. This person is pretending to feel this way about this, because they're trying to create this kind of impression, that sort of thing. But in this instance, I don't think it's wisdom, that's probably too strong a word, but age and experience that allows me to say without fear of any reasonable contradiction that immigration is indeed simply an issue that is blown all out of proportion so that some people can become and be kept in a state of anger and sort of indignation, the sense of like, we're losing our country, our values, our way of life, who we are and what we are is becoming altered by these aliens pouring over the borders. All this sort of thing. I mean, it's so obvious. I find it difficult to imagine anyone past the age of, say, 15 or so who isn't like seeing through all of this and going, okay, well, this is a manufactured thing. They keep calling it a crisis, the crisis at the border. The crisis at the border is the reaction of the current administration and their supporters and enablers all the way down the line to, the same old immigration problems that have existed for a long time, of people fleeing violence and drugs and poverty and all sorts of things in countries that have been manipulated by the United States. Let's face it. So even if, okay, let me step back from that a little bit. Even if you don't want to admit that, let's say you're I think America exceptionalism. America is a great country that does wonderful things. So you don't want to tread too heavily on the topic of why there are problems in Central and South America that cause people to want to go somewhere else very badly, even to the point of being willing to risk life and limb to get there. So you don't want to admit that U.S. has anything to do with that. Okay. We can leave that out because that's a big topic and it's a big complicated topic, and it's hard to talk about in a short span of time. I'd be glad to go into that at some point if you care to do it, and get guests on that can lay it out in point by point detail. But for now, let's just pretend, just for the sake of this one point that I'm trying to get at, that we don't know why people are fleeing. We just know that they're fleeing poverty and violence and, climate change. Oh, well, let's leave that out too, because you're probably going, oh, wait a minute, climate's always been changing, and it's just, yeah, okay. So we'll leave climate change and U.S. meddling in financial situations in politics and whatnot out of the equation. For some reason, people are fleeing northwards. Not all people, but enough that there is a steady flow of people who are wanting to come to the U.S. from across the southern border. Now, there are people coming from all over the world for various reasons. And as has been, boy, that's hard to say, and as has been, and as has been, yes, wow. Try saying that fast after a kombucha or two. And as has been pointed out many times by other people, I lost the train of what I was talking about. The primary undocumented or illegal, if you want to put it that way, immigrant is someone that comes here and overstays their visa. So the main way that we are getting people into this country that are without documentation are going through legal routes, and they're coming through airports and seaports and whatnot, and or driving, and they're coming in legally. They're saying, here are my papers, and someone's saying, thank you very much, enjoy your stay, and they're coming up and they're going, oh, you know what, I'm just not going to go back. So that's the primary way that it's happening. But somehow the thing that has so many people incensed is the fact that there are a steady flow, is a steady flow of people who are too poor, lack the connections or the documents or whatever to come in that way, and they're trying to come in other ways. They're coming here as refugees, for example, or they're just trying to sneak across the border. It's a smallish but fairly consistent flow of folks coming that way. And that is where we get the wall, we get all this rhetoric of, is where we get the let's deploy our forces down there, incredible expense to put Army, who it cannot do anything about this. They're not allowed to, but they can put up fences and they can, stack boxes or do whatever, to support our brave men and women on the border who are fighting this overwhelming tide of terrorists and drug dealers and whatnot, or whatever the rhetoric is. I don't even know how people imagine it, really. It baffles me what they're thinking. But anyway, that seems to be the focus. And that has been the focus ever since the T-Man first started running. I mean, that was his big thing. That was his calling card. We're going to build a wall. And everybody got excited about that. And who's going to pay for it? Well, Mexico is. That was his thing. And he has remained with that. He's tried to kind of push it away and let it sort of slide off at times when it became abundantly clear that A, Mexico was not going to pay for it, never would, never will, and B, neither was anyone else. So, he's been just sort of trying to sneak away from it until recently, as things have been getting tougher for him on the legal front. And I suspect they will continue to do so because the guy is a crook. So suddenly, the wall is becoming this big thing again. So as we end 2018 and go into 2019, we have a partial government shutdown because Mr. T could not get funding for his wall in the appropriations bills that were being floated around and had been agreed on, actually had been voted in the House and the Senate. Trump's like, no, I won't sign it. I won't. I want $5 billion or $25 billion or whatever it was he wanted for his wall. And, when it became clear that his base was once again saying, you promised us a wall and you haven't done it. What's going on here? Suddenly, that's a big deal again. So as we start the new year, the wall and the crisis at the border that the wall is supposed to deal with is the topic du jour again. We've even gone past the deaths of migrant children that have happened recently. There have been 2 or 3 of them now, young persons that have been in custody and have died in custody. That, of course, everybody's pointing the finger somewhere else and going, well, it wasn't me. I mean, they came here. They were sick already, or this happened or that happened. So, as awful as that is, that's being buried right now by the wall. And what are we going to do about it? So my first article that I thought I would read is, it was sort of an interesting one. I liked the title anyway, and it's titled Trump, quote, "I'm not flip-flopping, 100% concrete wall, mostly." So let's see what this is about. So it reads as follows. Despite public equivocations by 3 confidants, President Donald Trump is insisting he wants to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. Quote, "An all-concrete wall was never abandoned," in uppercase letters, all caps, tweeted Trump, whose demand for congressional funding to construct one has caused a budgetary standoff. Quote, "Some areas will be all concrete, but the experts at Border Patrol prefer a wall that is see-through, thereby making it possible to see what is happening on both sides," end quote. How's that for a statement? So Trump's comments on Monday came after officials, including his departing chief of staff, indicated that the president's signature campaign pledge, which I somehow lost here, hold on, to build a wall, would not be fulfilled as advertised. Trump sparked fervent chants of "build that wall" at rallies before and after his election, and more recently cited a lack of funding for a border wall as the reason for partially shutting down the government. At times, the president has also waved off the idea that the wall could be any kind of barrier. However, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly told the Los Angeles Times in an interview published Sunday that Trump abandoned the notion of a solid concrete wall early on in the administration. Quote, "To be honest, it's not a wall," Kelly said, adding that the mix of technological enhancements and steel slat barriers the president now wants along the border resulted from conversations with law enforcement professionals. Along the same lines, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway called discussion of the apparent contradiction a silly semantic argument. There may be a wall in some places. There may be steel slats. There may be technological enhancements, Conway told Fox News Sunday. But only saying wall or no wall is being very disingenuous and turning a complete blind eye to what is a crisis at the border. I need sound effects because whenever we talk about the crisis at the border, it needs to be like echoes and, something happening, because that's how it's stated. It's so overstated. It might as well be in big, 3D letters with lightning bolts coming out of it or something. Anyway, Senator Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina Republican who is close to the president, emerged from a Sunday lunch at the White House to tell reporters that, quote, the wall has become a metaphor for border security and referred to a physical barrier along the border. Graham said Trump was open-minded about a broader immigration agreement, saying the budget impasse presented an opportunity to address issues beyond the border wall. But a previous attempt to reach a compromise that addressed the status of dreamers, young immigrants brought to the U.S. as children, broke down last year as a result of escalating White House demands. Graham said he hoped to end the shutdown by offering Democrats incentives to get them to vote for wall funding, and told CNN before his lunch with Trump that there will never be a deal without wall funding. Graham proposed to help two groups of immigrants get approval to continue living in the U.S. About 700,000 young dreamers brought into the U.S. illegally as children, and about 400,000 people receiving temporary protected status because they are from countries struggling with natural disasters or armed conflicts. He also said the compromise should include changes in federal law to discourage people from trying to enter the U.S. illegally. Oh, let's stop here for a second. So, again, and this has happened in the past, and then they've sort of pulled the rug back, but again, the offer here seems to be, let's hold these people hostages in order to get our way. So they want this wall. First of all, a wall is, well, we can go into that later, but how impractical and ridiculous an idea this wall is. But they want it so badly, or Trump wants it so badly, that other Republicans are willing to support his desire for that to the extent of holding people hostage, holding their future hostage, their lives hostage, in order to get the Democrats to go along with charging the taxpayer, basically us, to pay for it, even though the whole idea in the first place was that we were going to build a wall and Mexico was going to pay for it. So, as originally articulated, there was going to be this giant wall built all across the southern border between the U.S. and Mexico, and Mexico was going to pay for that wall. That was Trump's pledge. Now, everybody's finding ways to go, oh, well, that hasn't changed except that it's different now. And they're finding ways to make it sound like, of course it's different now. But that kind of gets away from the fact that, A, it's different in part because the whole idea was ridiculous to begin with. Most of the border between U.S. and Mexico is the shape that it is because that's the Rio Grande River. So where exactly do you put a wall? Down the middle of the river, maybe? Because that's where the border actually is. It is in the river. Halfway across the river. Halfway across is the U.S., the other half of the way across is Mexico. That's where the border is. So obviously you're not going to put a wall down the center of the river. So where do you put it? Do you put it right next to the river, in the floodplain next to the river? How do you build it there? I mean, think about that for a second. Engineering-wise, it's pretty ridiculous. So you have to go farther and farther back from the river in order to put up a wall. And then what happens to the land between the wall and the river that was once U.S. territory? Are we just giving that to Mexico and saying, well, we can't build a wall on the border, so we're going to give you this 100, 200, 300 feet, whatever it is, off the edge of the country, that's yours now, basically, because our wall's in the back. It doesn't really make any sense. So primarily across this huge swath, I mean, the greatest part of the border, it's not possible to build a wall. The places where you can build something, there's something already built, pretty much, in most areas. There are places where there is nothing built, where it's mostly desert, and there's a reason why there's nothing built there, because there's nothing there. And it's kind of impassable. But basically, if you look at maps and you look at the structures that have been built, in the places where you can build a wall, there is some kind of barrier. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not saying, oh, well, this is great, we've got this. I don't think we need it. But even so, there's already something there. Now, Trump and his supporters and apologists and whoever can say, oh, well, we need to turn that stuff, those barriers, into a wall. Well, okay. That's, you can turn fencing into a wall if you really want to. It's pointless. The fencing is doing a good job. Nobody tries to cross there. They all cross where the river is, because that's obviously the easiest place to go across. If someone is going to go across that way, if they're wanting to go across without being seen, that's where they go a lot of the time, because that's the easiest way to go. But you can't build a wall there because there's a river there. So, and the wall can't be right on the beach, because that's a floodplain, and the foundations will wash out, or you'll have to dig it so deep that you're talking about an enormous expense. So basically, the wall is a ridiculous notion, and trying to come up with money for it is a ridiculous notion. It's all about pleasing the president and this rabid base who's convinced that we must have a wall because they heard there was going to be a wall, and they don't understand any more than he apparently does how impractical and absurd the idea is. So that's where we're at with this. And I just wanted to point out, stepping back a step or two, that Graham is basically offering, and I don't know if he can or not, but he's offering to hold young immigrants like the Dreamers and people with temporary protected status, otherwise known as TANF, I think, hostage in order to get money for a wall that can't or won't or shouldn't be built. So, to continue the story, Democrats have a chance here to work with me and others, including the president, to bring legal status to people who have very uncertain lives, Graham said. Now, I wonder why there wouldn't be a chance to do that otherwise. Could be they don't really want to do that. They're only willing to do that in order to get their wall. So it's, like I said, it's hostages. Anyway, the partial government shutdown began December 22nd after Trump bowed to conservative demands that he fight to make good on his vow and secure funding for the wall before Republicans lose control of the House on Wednesday. Democrats have remained committed to blocking the Republican president's priority, and with neither side engaging in substantive negotiations, the effect of the partial shutdown was set to spread and to extend into the new year. In August 2015, during the presidential campaign, Trump made his expectations for the border explicitly clear as he parried criticism from rival Jeb Bush, the former former Florida governor, not former governor from Growida or whatever. Anyway, quote, Jeb Bush just talked about my border proposal to build a fence, he tweeted. It's not a fence, Jeb. It's a wall. And there's a big difference. Okay, so it's not a fence, it's a wall. Trump suggested as much again in a tweet on Sunday. President and Mrs. Obama built has a 10-foot wall around their D.C. mansion compound. I agree, totally necessary for their safety and security. The U.S. needs the same thing, slightly larger version. Aside from what constitutes a wall, Neither side appeared ready to budge off its negotiating position. The two sides have had little direct contact during the stalemate, and Trump did not ask Republicans, who hold a monopoly on power in Washington until Thursday, to keep Congress in session. Trump tweeted Monday to Democrats, "Come back from vacation now and give us the votes necessary for border security, including the wall," end quote. Talks have been at a stalemate for more than a week after Democrats said the White House offered to accept $2.5 billion for border security. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer told Vice President Mike Pence that it wasn't acceptable, nor was it guaranteed, that Trump, under intense pressure from his conservative base to fulfill his signature campaign promise, would settle for that amount. Conway claimed Sunday that the president has already compromised by dropping his request for the wall from $25 billion, and she called on Democrats to return to the negotiating table. "It is with them," she said, explaining why Trump has not reached out to Democrats. Democrats maintain that they have already presented the White House with 3 options to end the shutdown, none of which funds the wall, and insist that it's Trump's move. At this point, it's clear the White House doesn't know what they want when it comes to border security, said Justin Goodman, Schumer's spokesman. While one White House official said they're willing to compromise, another says the president is holding firm at no less than $5 billion for the wall. Meanwhile, the president tweets blaming everyone but himself for a shutdown he called for more than 25 times. After canceling a vacation to his private Florida club, Trump spent the weekend at the White House. He has remained out of the public eye since returning early last Thursday from a 29-hour trip to visit U.S. troops in Iraq, instead taking to Twitter to attack Democrats. He also moved to defend himself from criticism that he couldn't deliver on the wall while the GOP controlled both the House and the Senate. Quote, "For those that naively ask why didn't the Republicans get approval to build the wall over the last year, it is because in the Senate we need 10 Democrat votes, and they will give us none for border security," he tweeted. "Now we have to do it the hard way, with a shutdown." Democrats have vowed to pass legislation restoring the government as soon as they take control of the House on Thursday, but that won't accomplish anything unless Trump and the Republican-controlled Senate go along with it. The shutdown has forced hundreds of thousands of federal workers and contractors to stay home or work without pay. On the campaign trail, Trump promised that Mexico would pay for the wall, but Mexico has refused. So that's the latest with the wall news. That's what's up in the wall world, Wally world. Yeah, it's just. Again, it's just such an obviously pointless exercise in what is it? Flexing muscles, in shaking a clenched fist towards the Mexican people, and by extension, everybody south of of that country, because they're all the same apparently. It's just such a pointless thing. It's pretended strength. It's how can I put it? Like the Berlin Wall. You remember the Berlin Wall, right? I'm not the only one here that's old enough to remember the Berlin Wall. I mean, that it was an act of desperation. It wasn't what you do when you're strong. And it wasn't to keep people out, it was to keep people in. And it was so obviously an act of desperation. I mean, it was scary. Yeah, if you lived there, it was terrifying to have that wall there and these guards and barbed wire and all that stuff. I mean, it is scary to do things like that.